Hi. Last time when we were discussing the eighth sutra of Ashtadhyayi, Mukkanasika Vachanomnasikaha, I pointed out that while we started marching along in good order with Panini for the first three sutras, uh, then we went from 113 and jumped to 117 as per this. So we started with, Vrittiradh 111, Adenganaha 112, Eko Gunavritti, and then we jumped all the way to Halonantaraha Samyogaha 117. And just, for a frame of reference that I'll come back to a little bit, Siddhanta Kaumudi was kind of bouncing around from the beginning. So 111 is 16, 112 is 17, 113 is 34, and 117 is 30. So the question arises, what happened to 114, 115, and 116? Now, this happens to be a good opportunity to elaborate on part of what makes the approach to the grammar that I'm sharing with you unique in its own way, very special, and I would say a powerful mode which makes learning the grammar a much more practical enterprise for people who have day jobs and so on. So, first question is, where did they go? What happened to them? Why did they leave? And if they were going to leave, why were they 114, 115, 116 in the first place? Now, this is relevant to understanding how we're approaching it, but it also ties into a theme that I'm intrigued by in thinking about how the experience of the grammar has changed over time. Now, the amazing thing is that, or an amazing thing is that the actual Panini Sutras have been pretty enduring. I mean, there may have been a little bit of funny business here or there, but which may have gotten corrected. But by and large, Ashtadhyayi itself hasn't changed. And as you know, in our brief overview before, when Panini constructed the grammar, he was constructing a description of the language he spoke, the educated language of his time, for the most part. And that's significant because he's not describing, for the most part, exotic forms, verb forms, noun forms, words, and so on. In fact, it's very clear. He relies and he values the spoken language. And we will get to wonderful examples of how literally true that is when we study Sandhi in the grammar, which is really cool. Anyway, so when Panini wrote his grammar, he wasn't teaching people how to speak or Sanskrit properly. There is the Veda, but even that is sort of to the side in the grammar a little bit. But for the most part, it was the spoken language. Then the curtain falls to denote the passage of about 500 years, by which time things have changed. And we know they've changed because several grammars began to emerge, which were very simple. Well, yeah, very simplified. I haven't read them. I read about them. Versions of Ashtadhyayi, meaning they had many fewer sutras. They were also geared towards forming formation of words, usable words, and they had a more narrative quality. Ashtadhyayi could not be less narrative. So that was one thing that was happening, and that began a Prakriya school of the grammar, which ultimately found its flowering in Siddhanta Kaumudi. And we'll come back to that because, as I mentioned before, Siddhanta Kaumudi is a particular kind of compromise. Unlike the earlier Prakriya grammars, it is comprehensive. So it doesn't simplify anything. It gives a very helpful commentary and description of how sutras work, what they mean, which is absolutely necessary because they're completely out of order, meaning their intrinsic relationship to each other and rationale is lost. So it's a great grammar for commenting, clarifying aspects of Ashtadhyayi, but it's pretty rough haul for learning Ashtadhyayi and experiencing that for several decades as a professor of Sanskrit at Andhra University, trying to teach Siddhanta Kaumudi is what drove my professor, my teacher, Sri Prabhakara Shastri, to return to his roots and modify Ashtadhyayi, but leaving it as it is, essentially. And this is an example of what that means and how it makes sense. And then, at the same time that these Prakriya grammars were emerging, the enormous comprehensive commentaries of Mahabhashya and so on were also emerging. But those remained, I think, always very, very specialized. So this is, so we'll come to how that bears on the disappearing sutras. So as I said, we had 111, Vritirādayich, Atengunaha, Iko Guna Vritti. Now, as you may remember, Vritti and Gunaha from the first two sutras came as Anuvritti into Iko Guna Vritti. That's really key to understanding what's going on, what the plot of the story is. So what were the missing sutras and where did they go? Well, these are the missing sutras. 114 is Nadatulopa Ardhadatake. 115 is Ngiticha, and 116 is Didivevitam. Now, just to give you an idea of where they went, take a look at where they went in Siddhanta Kaumudi, because 114 became 2,656, 115 became 2,217, and 116 became 2,190. Well, what is that all about and why? Well, where they went is they went to very specific points of modification of rules in the formation of verbs. And they were very specific. In fact, they were exceptions to generalized rule. And which exceptions to what rule we'll come right back to. But how is this different than these that we started with? Well, as you remember, we described these first sutras that we are studying as the sutras for the operation of the grammar. And so that's what they are about. So Vritirādayich, we said, was a Sanya Sutra. That means it gave the name to Vriddhi. Adengunaha, again, Sanya Sutra gave the name of Gunaha. Iko Guna Vriddhi, is a Paribhasha Sutra, which provides a convention, meaning throughout the grammar, when gunaha and vriddhi are invoked with the words gunavriddhi, which is what's important about coming down from the first two sutras, then in that case, we have to understand that also in whatever rule that is ikaha in place of ik. So these are, and then again, we come to Halonataraha Samyogaha. That's also a Samyoga Sutra, meaning sutras that give names, sutras that give conventions, they are part of the operation of the whole grammar. These sutras are not at all that. They are, in fact, exceptions to particular rules and very specific. In fact, the third one, di vevi tam, applies to just two verbs, to particular exception. Anytime you see niti cha or na, that means they're modifications, usually a cha and a na. That means the underlying, one of the assumptions of the grammar is to give a general rule and then list a series of exceptions or additions. So niti cha would be an addition, unless anyway, and also na is an exception. So they're variation. And you can see that even though these are all in the 2000s, there are hundreds of sutras in Siddhanta Kaumudi apart. So putting that all together, these sutras, for our purposes, don't really belong with what we're doing now. We're learning the operation of the grammar. One day, with any luck, and it has been done, we will get to the verbal rules and into them in enough depth that these will all of a sudden be just what we need. So it makes all the sense in the world for Prabhakara Shastri to lift these out of the original order and pop them where they belong in the derivation of verb forms. And it's not going to be hard for us to remember if we are told then that guna vriddhi or iko guna vriddhi come into them by anuvritti, because we will remember this. Now that's something that I think, I'm not sure this is fair, but my impression, and I'm only getting my toes wet, is that to some extent contemporary scholars of the grammar who unquestionably know orders of magnitude, many lifetimes orders of magnitude, more of the content of the grammar than I do or ever will. But I have the feeling sometimes that, while of course they know that it was originally meant to be memorized, it's not real to them. So what I was told the very first thing is that the grammar doesn't exist until all of the sutras are in our mind. Luckily, as I said, we don't actually have to have all of them for it to become very real to us. But the thing is that when we have them in our mind, it doesn't matter where they were. It only matters, their position only matters in defining their function. But it's not any kind of big leap for us to have them all floating around in our mind and then to have them operate. So the other principle in the grammar is economy. And grammarians are known for being putting economy at a very, very high value, and all sorts of stories about what grammarians would give in order to save half a syllable in a sutra. For instance, their son's wedding or something like that. So this is the answer to why, if they are operating thousands of sutras later in formation or particular points of the formation of specific verbs, why did Panini put them at the beginning? Well, that's very simple. because they came after Vrittiradaya Chidingunaha Ekoguna Vritti. And those three sutras supplied anuvrittihi, that meant that he would never have to mention them again because they would be automatically included. So that's both why Panini put them there and why Prabhakar Shastri and, in a sense, Batochi Dikshita put them way up here, and why they both make sense. And that goes again to where we are now, because Prabhakar Shastri's modification of the grammar, again, maintains the inner machinery, but reorders it in certain very specific, understandable ways so that it facilitates our having a working knowledge of the grammar, which has the capacity to be complete, but doesn't require that in order to feel a true mastery of the system and a lot of the details. So that's it for now.